Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this discussion on democracy under threat. Really pleased that we've brought this all together. We'll be getting started with a discussion moderated by Ava, and Glenn, Lenin, and Karen will be having a conversation over the next hour about some fundamental questions on democracy. I'll leave it there because I'm sure Ava will do a much better job at introducing the session than I will. But just a few housekeeping notes. We would love to see you all on camera. If you could, put your cameras on. If anyone is uncomfortable with that, that's also totally fine. And just a note that this session is being recorded. So if anyone has any objections to that, please let us know in the chat. And I'd just like to also share a short video about Catalyst 2030 and Catalyzing Change Week with you before we get started.
Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
And with that, I would like to hand over to Ava.
Well, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be able to participate in these sessions, and in particular to be asked to facilitate. So if there are any glitches, that will rest on my shoulders. If there are any kudos to be awarded, the staff of Catalyst, Deepa and Anthony, it's all in your quarters, and we have 3 incredible speakers. So without taking any more time on preliminaries, we really have a terribly important subject to address: social, economic, environmental justice of any kind. How challenging is it for us to actually provide justice for the people in this world, and to ensure that each individual has a voice that can be heard, that can express their individuality, and that in a way in which they have equity vis-a-vis others. And those are challenges which are as old as the world exists, and these days are particularly highlighted. So for each of our 3 speakers, they have really dedicated their lives to this battle, I could say. Lenin Ragavanshi is a Dalit rights activist, a political thinker and social entrepreneur from India. He is one of the founding members of the People's Vigilance Committee on Human Rights, PVCHR, which works for the upliftment of the marginalized sections of society. His work, excuse me, if I can figure out how to work technology, I'll be much better at this. His work has been recognized with many human rights and peace awards. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to combat masculinity-driven militarist traditions, for his contribution to bettering conditions for peace in the world, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of masculinity-driven militarist traditions as a weapon of war and conflict. For 2 decades, Glenn Martin conceptualized, created, and directed a handful of multi-million-dollar organizations in the not-for-profit sector. He was the vice president of the Fortune Society, where he founded and led the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. He served as the co-director of the National Hire Network at the Legal Action Center. He founded the Education from the Inside Out Coalition. He is the founder and visionary behind the Close Rikers campaign in New York City. Glenn has served as a public speaker on national media, MSNBC, Fox, CNN, and Al Jazeera. And last but not least, Karen C. is the founder of International Bridges to Justice in 2000 to promote systemic global change in the administration of criminal justice. IBJ focuses on protection of due process rights. With a presence in 48 countries in over 20 years, IBJ has supported more than 30,000 lawyers and defenders who have represented more than 220,000 detainees. A former San Francisco public defender and ordained minister, Karen's social entrepreneurship has been recognized by the Skoll Foundation, Ashoka, and Echoing Green. She was the recipient of the Harvard Divinity School's First Decade Award and many international awards. Thank you so much to each one of you for taking the time and participating in this workshop today. So we have set up our conversation, which really could go for much longer than that little bit of time we have for this session. And the first question that each of you will try to address in whichever way is most appropriate from your perspective is as follows. In many countries, there have been massive movements of people on the ground, massive bottom-up civil unrest. How does the work you have been involved in and or do presently link to or impact to these democratic initiatives? And I'll ask Glenn to go first.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that generous introduction, and thank you to the organizers. Good morning from Harlem, New York. Hello to my fellow panelists and to the audience. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. As a Black man who served 6 years in prison in the United States before engaging in advocacy work for the last 2 decades, and as someone who really lives with the compounded consequences of that experience, which rests on top of issues of race and class and other barriers to access in the United States. The majority of my work has been on democracy, but primarily focused at the intersection of democracy and the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system in the United States, probably more commonly referred to as a system of mass incarceration, has really ballooned into a human grist mill that now translates into 70 million Americans having a criminal record on file. I want people to sort of sit with that number for a minute. In a country that has 320 million people, 70 million have a criminal record on file. Essentially, mass incarceration and mass criminalization disproportionately impacts people of color in the United States, but there's also a particularly insidious character to our justice system in the United States, which really involves post-arrest and post-conviction consequences that are imposed and disseminated by agencies and individuals and entities really outside of our criminal justice system. So barriers to housing, barriers to healthcare, barriers to education, barriers to employment, and for the sake of today's discussion, barriers to voting, just to name a few. Over 5.5 million people in the US simply cannot vote due to having a criminal record on file, even if they've completed their sentence. 2.3% of the voting age population in the United States, essentially, and millions more are actually disenfranchised based on misinformation. Our voting rights laws for people with criminal records differ from state to state. And so if you are in New York, you never lose your right to vote if you're on probation, for instance. But if you're in a place like Alabama in the deep South in the United States, you essentially lose your voting rights forever based on having a criminal conviction. So 1 in 16 Black people of voting age is disenfranchised as a result of these laws and policies, a rate 3.7 times greater than that of people who are not Black in the United States. And over 6.2% of the adult Black population is disenfranchised compared to 1.7% of the non-Black population in the US. So in America, as in other places around the world, systems of oppression, as we know, are really durable and reinvent themselves. And so after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, our criminal record-based voting laws increasingly began to serve as a surrogate for race-based discrimination, and geographically and racially essentially perform the same way as our Jim Crow laws used to operate, keeping people of color, particularly Black people, away from civil society, away from our democracy, our levers of democracy. So Black disenfranchisement rates vary by state. In 7 states in the US, arguably the most racist states in the US, to be frank, Alabama, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, Tennessee, Virginia, Wyoming, more than 1 in 7 Black people are disenfranchised, twice the national average for Black Americans. And even at a time when there's been bipartisan support for criminal justice reform in the United States, which people might be hearing about even outside of the country, we've enjoyed that for the last decade and a half, in fact, going back to the Bush administration. But there was a recent passage of an amendment in Florida which restored voting rights to over 1.4 million people with records. But even that was challenged almost immediately in the courts and in the legislature by Republicans, and resulted in those very people having to first complete all terms of their sentence, which in the United States includes the payment of fines, fees, and restitution, which is another aspect of our criminal justice system that creates barriers to democracy by taking people from our criminal justice system, our system of mass incarceration, and essentially puts them into a system where, based on the monies owed to government, they just continue to be to face consequences and to not have access to our democracy. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Lenin, we look forward to hearing from you. You need to,
Lenin,
you need, there you go. No.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry for some technical problems here, but I heard the whole story of the Black movements in India, also the Dalits and the minorities and the Muslims and tribal people are fighting here. The most important thing in India, you need to understand the cognitive factor of the hegemonic masculinity of the caste system of that hierarchy. And another hand, the contextual factors of they want to neoliberal policies, and both come together and make a new marriage and create a corporate fascism. And Adani and Ambani with the Modi and Amit Shah, they create a corporate fascist states, and it is the emerging corporate fascist state. What we achieved in 70 years due to Dr. Baba Bhimrao Ambedkar and the Gandhiji, they want to erode everything. And for that reason, it is the pregnancy time of the real democracy in our country. And one hand, the pain, agonies, and one hand, the happiness, because the forward movement is going on. People are fighting and they are suppressing us. But after that, also, we are telling we need to fight back them. We don't support the culture of violence, and we don't support the culture of silence also. And in this way, you look also the elections they are losing in the many states. very badly first time after the all EVM things, robbing the EVMs and everything. So in this way, if you look that in the 17 years, systematically they want to attack on all our institutions. But here in the last, I'm telling you, you look the population of Muslim. Population of Muslim in our country is 18%, but the population of the Muslim in the prison in the more than 80%. How it is possible? And 6% Dalits only holding the lands of this country. And we people, upper caste people, are the robbers in the 3,000 years to capture the more than 70% of the resources in this country. And they want to maintain this hegemonic co-status with the help of the neoliberal policies and all. And in this way, India is an absolute emerging corporate fascist state, which is creating a problem for the Indian constitution and universal values. But on the other hand, there is a big fight. And this big fight is not going to create by the upper class people. And the people like us, only we are doing the reconciliations. They are the real Dalits, tribals, Muslims. And they are coming together and they are fighting and creating their mass movement on the grassroots level. And they are the hopes. They are not only going to liberate themselves, they are also going to liberate to us also. And so this is the situation in India is going on. And I'm going to stop, and you look the farmer and everything movement is going, and you look the corona, what happened? This people are only promoting the so-called religions, everything, elections, and people are fighting. People are dying here, and there is no things. So actually, the mind of caste and patriarchy of hegemonic masculinity by the Manusmriti is a book. Please read about that. They will create actually in this country one of the biggest corruption and the absolute system where is a lot of good written things in the constitution, but on the grassroots, no implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenin. That is such important information from your country. Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'm also so very happy to be here with Catalyst and also with my phenomenal panelists and moderators. So thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. And the first thing I want to say, which I think is clear to all of our defenders everywhere, is that there is no democracy without defenders. And I think this is one of the biggest misunderstandings of the world. And it's something that as a global community, there is consistently, emphasis on elections and fair elections and whatnot. And that is fantastic and wonderful, but it's really just the starting point. It's not, we say that it's what needs to happen is everyday democracy, not democracy every 4 years when you cast a ballot. It's really what happens in terms of protection every single day. So, for us, International Bridges of Justice works on ensuring that every single person who is accused of a crime will one day, our hope and dream is that one day every single person will have access to a lawyer, and this will protect them from being tortured, which happens rampantly around the world because it's the cheapest form of investigation, and will give them access so that they're protected all the way through the process. For us, it's been a real journey in understanding, and even in terms of working with the international community, to really place the work of defenders, which is critical. We would say that it is, really the cornerstone of democracy. Without it, there really is no democracy at the forefront. And if I can give one example, and then also speak to a current situation, the situation in Burundi was very, 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 very dangerous for many people. And in 2015, when there were again the elections in April and May, hundreds of people were being picked up and, really just killed, just put together and killed. And during that time, that was when the country needed defenders more than ever. And it was crazy because literally the international community just failed them. Everybody just stopped. They said, well, we care about elections, we care about democracy, but let's focus on, fair elections. You can't have fair elections if you're picking people up who are protesting and torturing them and throwing them in jail. So what I will say is that I'm very excited too, because Jean-Claude, who's also heading our program, is on this call. And, they very, very courageously said, despite the fact that the international community is abandoning us because they don't understand the critical need for defenders at this point, we are going to just keep on going. And during that period of time, they represented over 800 people and just kept going and kept going and kept going. So what we understand is that the work of defenders is critical to the process of democracy. It's not just about elections, it's about who's going to defend the protesters, but who's also going to give everyday justice and protection to people. Today, we see something very similar in Myanmar with what's happening in the state of emergency. There are protesters, I'm sure all of you are very aware of this, and it's a time of extreme courage and strength for people and the defenders who are also standing up. So during this period, we've got 5 defender justice centers, and they have been organizing to support defenders throughout to support protesters throughout the country. Been very, very successful in being able to also be a liaison between even parents. I mean, I was speaking with one of our defenders who was talking about the fact that, when the parents can't access their children, at least they've got defenders who can be the go-between and work together to ensure justice. We've been able to successfully have a number of the children as well as adults released. We've worked on talking about freedom of speech and everything else, not only for the protesters, but been successful in working with even ensuring the release and safe return of one of the journalists. It's something that's ongoing and really part of a greater process, which I think we'll get to in our later conversation. And I will just continue to beat the point home, because I think it's something which unfortunately our international community does not understand. If we're going to prioritize democracy, we have to prioritize defenders in order for us to not just be short-sighted about the elections once every 4 years, but what is everyday democracy and what does it mean for the protection of people? Even in terms of the title of Democracy Under Threat, it's really a question of it's under threat right now, but maybe it's been, I'm sure a lot of people will agree, also people on this panel, democracy is not just under threat now. Democracy has not been a reality for the majority of disenfranchised people in the world. And today we say, oh, we're under threat. No, you know what? There has been no justice. There have been voiceless people who are tortured every day, who are, do not have a voice. And it's time that we realize that it's not just under threat now, it's an everyday process, and we need to be not short-sighted in terms of looking at small, quick fixes, but what do we have to do to build systems in the long run?
Thank you so much, Karen. It's such an important issue. It's the point that torture is the cheapest form of investigation is really a point that is not going to get forgotten very quickly. How do you now deal, since you are the first one up on the next question, how do you deal with the question of rule of law and equity? What does equity mean in the context of access to justice?
I mean, I would say that access to democracy is about equity through access to justice. I myself started my career as a public defender in San Francisco in the United States. And at that time, I was shocked to see the criminalization of race and poverty. And I thought, this is so horrible. It was very hard and very difficult to be a public defender. But then I went on to work in Cambodia and then found international bridges to justice. And what I discovered, which was extremely unsettling, is actually the criminalization of race and poverty is a worldwide phenomena. Throughout the world, people are criminalized, and it's seriously troubling as you look at it. I mean, just as a rough statistic, 1/3 of the people in detention today globally have not had a trial. And 1/3 is rough because there are countries that we work in where actually literally 70 to 80% of the people that you meet have not had a trial. And I've been in prisons where I remember walking into one prison and saying, how long have you been here without a trial? I mean, how many of you have been here for 1 month? A bunch of people raise their hand. How many of you have been here for a year? A bunch of people raise their hand. Then I kept going. 5 years, hands raised. 8 years, hands raised. And I remember turning to the guard and saying, this was in Zimbabwe, did they understand me correctly? Because I said pre-trial detention. How many have been here without having a lawyer for how many years? And he said, yep. we have people here who have been here years without a trial. So, you know, it's an issue in terms of equity is about how do we give people the due process rights that are actually enshrined in the Constitution. How do we implement them and how do we move it forward so that it's not just a fancy dream that we all have, but something that gets implemented.
Thank you, Lenin.
I started my statements with a statement: peace without justice is the culture of silence and impunity. So it is very, very important. Justice is the central point. And if you look in India, I've already a lawyer and the founders of the this Border Without Sanjeeva described that Indian Supreme Court provided a lot of fantastic judgment, but there is no implementation on the grassroots level because there is a problems how the implementers are the suffering with the mind of caste and patriarchy. Corruption is so high. And in this way, it is important to understand, if you look, if you have money, if you have the name, if you belongs to upper caste, means white people and the big family, and you have the case, you have the all privileges. As a human rights defender too, what I receive a lot of cases, but I observe the discrimination with the Dalits and the poor people and the tribals and the Muslims are so horrible. So in this way also I am a privilege there, and we need to eliminate this privilege. It is not a privilege, it is a robbery, it is a jakati when they created by the system without eliminating this element. And for that reason, Nelson Mandela told that we have a lot of international standards, we have a lot of international norms. It is important times to need to implement on the grassroots level, become the earthworms to fertile the lands, and they change the mind of the people and the knowledge, attitudes, and the practice of the people. And in this way, we create a better world. A person asked me in the chatting, Anthony, you look how the Jeru Bilmoria created a child line when I was a kid, and I participated in her movements, and she created a child line movement all over India, which has become a very, very powerful. So most important thing, we need to talk with everybody without the biases, and also we need to bring our voice on the corridor of the policymakers, and for that reason we need to work with the human champions in the policymakers. And here on the grassroots level, we need to create a sandwich. One hands we need to create the culture of silence and support the survivor, and they march on. And the international, from the United Nations to the national and the state and provincial and the district level, we need to put the things. Then that sandwich is going to create very well. And we created many sandwich in the 200 villages to eliminate the caste system and the patriarchy and the feudal structures. And we receive a lot of threats and everything. And also we 280 crore Indian rupees people received the compensations due to the National Human Rights Commission. Many people went to the prisons, especially the perpetrators. So it is important. I'm going to tell the last thing. After the working the 10 years, a Musahar, who last person of the society, he told, I'm going to fight a election this year, and he won. He became the head of village and spending 200 rupees. And then he told, you look, we learn a lot. We break our culture of silence. You need to spend your money and other thing in another villages. Here we are fighting. We become a leader. We don't want the leader like you. I become very happy when these people are going to tell people like us, we don't need you like a leader. We need like you a leader. Justice system is going to happen in this country. This is my remark. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenin. There is so much there in what you just said that we could have a whole hour lecture just on the subjects you've just raised. So Glenn.
All right, thank you. I think I preferred when I had the chance to go first. Karen and Lenin are tough acts to follow. You know, you make me think back to the work I did to close down Rikers Island in New York and convince the New York City government to do so. This is one of the most progressive, resource-rich cities in the country, and yet we operated a torture island in our backyard next to one of the busiest airports in the country that had hundreds of thousands of particularly people of color going through it and suffering harm in that place. And what that campaign taught me and reminded me is that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but furthest from power and resources. And we have to recognize that people have been deliberately silenced. And how do we take those people and move them from the margin to the center, to humanize an issue, to humanize the very people that have been dehumanized, to allow for these systems to operate. And yet at the same time, to people of privilege in a country whose institutions are all shaped by white supremacy culture, equity feels like oppression. And most white people in the US would simply prefer to focus on equality instead of equity in the context of access to justice. Estimates show that nearly 4 in 10 Americans identify with a race or ethnic group other than white, and suggest that between 2010 and 2020, that decade, it'll be the first in the nation's history in which the white population has actually declined in numbers. And so some people point to that shift in race and equity, ethnicity as evidence that people of color will increasingly have access to equitable justice in the US. In fact, the majority of Americans, 64%, say racial and ethnic diversity has a positive impact on the country's culture and governance. But at the same time, 47% believe having a racially and ethnically diverse population actually makes it harder for policymakers to attack and tackle the country's challenges. So what people often ignore when they just think about the numbers alone is that 20 of the largest cities in the US have been majority people of color for over 2 decades. And that has actually done little to nothing to shift the balance of power and access to equitable justice in this country. And that's because justice through the lens of equity is about more than just numbers. It's about access to resources, access to information, acknowledgement of historic harm, privilege. You and I talked about this a bit a couple of days ago, Eva, that privilege is like cumulative, and white Americans essentially have a 400-year head start, while Black Americans continue to get gunned down in our streets by the very people who say they're here to protect us, namely our police. And so that privilege runway can't be ignored when you're having a conversation about access to equitable justice. From school boards to Congress, from sort of local, hyper-local elections to Congress, too many elected officials don't look like or share the values of the communities that they actually represent, primarily because most elections in the US are winner take all. So whether we're choosing just one winner at a time or multiple winners in a single contest, it really is winner take all. So either way, the winners take all the representation, leaving others, even as much as 49% of the vote share, with no access to power, no access to decision-making. And this creates a fictional divide and leads to a 2-party system that we have that really minimizes racial and economic issues and devalues the votes of millions of people. So the right to vote must be as real, in my opinion, in practice as it really is in paper here in this country. Many hard-fought and hard-won advances have all too often been countered by violent protests or just deliberate schemes to deny the franchise to people of color, like I named earlier on giving access to voting back to people with criminal records in Florida, and how that was met with a really hard legislative and court-based pushback. I think progressive Americans have to be vigilant in defending past voting right gains. And at the same time, proportional representation can transform our democracy, I believe, by creating a government and possibly new political parties that actually accurately reflect all of our communities and our values and our issues.
Well, thank you. Again, a lot to unpack there. I'm glad somebody's recording all these comments that all of you are making so that some of us at least can go and spend some time to review and think more closely about what you are all saying. So our last question for the session, and since my screen is now all over my laptop screen, if you just give me a minute, so the next thing that we had thought would be helpful to talk about is, what does it take to have meaningful, equitable participation? And Glenn, you started to talk a little bit about this, and as have you, Lenin and Karen. What supports would enable democratic process? Is there a prospect of common ground? And if so, where and how? And Lenin, to you first.
Yeah, you look, my mind is always working with the medicine. So for that, it is important. We need to diagnose before giving any treatment. And diagnosis is very important. And many people are just hiding the diagnosis in the carpet, especially in India. And they told, oh, no caste system, no patriarchy, nothing is happening. Also, they are telling there is no links with the caste system, with the racism. I will tell you only one example. And the Parvati, the goddess of the wife of the Lord Shiva, she prayed for many years to color her, change her color. So, and it is written in the Holy Book. So it is the racism for me, and I protested in this way. So that is very important. We need to diagnose that, and diagnosis in the South Asia is the hegemony, masculinity of the caste system and patriarchy. And you look why the Malala, she wanted the education and they put the guns on their heads. So, and that is the whole level. And for the solution, it is very important for me. Lord Buddha told, if you want to eliminate the hatred, not by the hatred, only by the love. It is the eternal law. And Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar has a lot of discussion and debate, but they have a lot of similarity, means the non-violence, and to discuss with each other, to give the honor to the differences, give the opinion, also respect the diversity and all. And in this way, if you look, nowadays we are telling Gandhi is the father of the nation, but Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ambedkar is the father of modern nations. And Dr. Ambedkar also changed myself from the upper caste devils to the human being. So it is very important to understand. And in the last, I will tell you, we need to change the culture of silence by fear and phobia through the many processes, small processes. We are through the testimonial therapy, through the folk school in the Denmark and all. This testimonial therapy happened in the Peru and all. So giving the testimony and all, speak out. We need to speak out. We need to oppose the injustice. And the other things, it is also important to create a reconciliations, especially on the historical value. At least upper caste people, white people, white terrorists, what the President of America told, that they need to recognize their mindset, what they are doing. Man, we are crazy. You change your thing and this crazy mindset, and then start the reconciliation with these people. And they are very fantastic people. They love you. I will tell you, I work in 13 years. When I'm in the problem, never my family supported me, but the Dalit people always came and support me everywhere. So this is the very important. If you have real heart, you are working with the hearts. With them, they will support you. And in the last, we are giving the slogan for that reason. We are against patriarchy, but not a man. We want to save the man from the patriarchy, become the human being. We are against the caste system, but not the person born in upper caste. But we want to save the upper caste man and the women. They will become the human being. We are against the communalism and fascism, but we are not against the religion. Please, all religion come together and to eliminate the fascism, racism, and the caste system and patriarchy in this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Glenn, how do you follow that?
Yeah, how do I follow that? At least I can feel comfortable in saying that, you know, I'm in the United States, and the truth is I really don't have a lot of good news in response to this question. You know, we talk about common ground. America is increasingly tribal. Just recently, a Tennessee lawmaker wrongly suggested, just Tuesday that passed, that America's infamous 3/5 compromise was an effort by northern states to curtail the power of southern slave-owning states with the ultimate aim of ending slavery, when in fact historians say it was quite the opposite, and a dehumanizing concession that actually had the impact of giving more power to slave-owning states. And here we are, we have a representative in Congress that can say this on the floor and walk away unchallenged, actually walk away to applause. So, you know, there's not a sort of bright and clear line forward, I believe, for this country on this issue of moving towards more equitable justice. Having said that, what Lenin just said about diagnosis really resonates with me, because when, you know, for all of the challenges that exist in places like Karen mentioned, Cambodia and Lenin in India, those trips in my life for me were actually pretty inspiring to go to those countries, because in America, we just don't have truth and reconciliation. Like, we're not even intellectually honest about how we got here and how people have been actually moved to the margins, and how white supremacy continues to play out in how we essentially keep people relegated to the margins. So I do think we need a truth and reconciliation here in this country about how we got here, and some honesty about it, and reparations to help to move us forward. And then also a comprehensive look, some sort of comprehensive equity assessment, if you will. And hopefully we can emerge from that process with a commitment to remove barriers that underserved communities and individuals face to democracy and civil society. Maybe a review of our policies, our regulations, our guidance with an eye towards advancing equity. You know, we're in the middle of a moment here in the United States that stems from the murder of a gentleman named George Floyd by our police. And it created a moment of demand for racial justice in this country in a way that we haven't seen in a couple of decades. And while we're experiencing this sort of traditional influx of United States version of philanthropy, which sometimes can actually dilute the moment, arguably, and, you know, give us things like street murals instead of equitable justice, the fact is that I do still think that there's an opportunity to focus on democracy and rule of law and equity in this country right now, and figure out who gets to participate and who doesn't, who has voice, who has opportunity, what does it mean to actually be meaningfully involved, who has access to resources, information, transparency, and so on. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but at the same time, in this country at least, power has never, and probably will never, concede anything without a demand. And so if there's anything good that can come out of the insidious, blatant murder of George Floyd, hopefully it'll be that we pay greater public attention in the US to the need to work on these issues that disproportionately impact Black and Brown communities and keep us away from equitable justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Karen, you get the last word.
Thank you. Well, I also want to say, talk about hope. Glenn, my son, literally yesterday, my son was talking about Frederick Douglass, and he said exactly that, right? And so I wish he was on this call. And I think this is sort of like the hope of the new generation that, you know, can hear people like you talk about, yeah, and Lenin, and, you know, how do we move forward? But he was saying exactly that, you know, that power is not going to happen because it just doesn't concede itself without a struggle, without a voice. And so this gives me hope, you know, also that we have the young generation that's going to move us forward. I also, you know, going back to our earlier premise that democracy is based on the rule of law. You have to have rule of law. You have to have access to justice. And that being so, my sense is that this is only going to happen if we have a long-term commitment to access to justice, and not, sort of like easy solutions or when it's happy and when it's not, when it's a cool movement. Right now it's hip, now it's cool, but it has to be a long-term commitment, and it has to happen over longer periods of time. So if we look at it, even going back to my earlier Burundi example, I remember being really sort of disheartened when we were speaking with some of our lawyers, and they were telling me about a woman protester who they had defended, and they said, we stood up, we defended this woman, and afterwards we took her before the judge and we said, listen, she was accused of cooking food for the protesters. And they said, listen, you could take her to the back and you see she has whip marks on her. She confessed because she was tortured. And the judge looked at the lawyer and said, well, you know what? That may be true. You get 10 years, which is completely not very exciting and not very happy for the defenders. And hearing that story, my heart sank. And I said, wow, how do you so courageously continue to fight case by case when you get verdicts like this? And then they looked at me and they said, oh, you have little faith, which I love when they kind of like slap me and say, you have no faith. Where's your faith, girl? And they said, can we tell you though? And they told me that, they said, just Tuesday, there was a 10-year-old girl and she was, holding a stick. The police picked her up and said, you know what? You are probably protesting or doing something like this with this. She's 10 years old. They picked her up, they put her in the bottom of their lorry. They drove her around from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And when they got, she was totally sick. When they got out, they pushed her, they threw her out, and she would have probably gone to jail, been in prison, horrible things would have happened. And this lawyer said, but because Burundi Bridges to Justice has started a system of early access to a lawyer, we are there every Tuesday, every Thursday at the police station. We were there at that time, and we were able to immediately intervene, and we got the girl out. So, it's about system change. It's about implementing institutions also of justice, so there's predictability in the system and it's long-term. I mean, when we look at Myanmar, it's the same thing. It was, 5 decades of military rule. And so even back when we started speaking with the government in 2012, they were like, yeah, a lot of torture then. Torture still happens because, as we all know, torture often continues even after democratic elections because it's the cheapest form of investigation, as police are used to it. So the police at that time said, maybe we could discuss how we might work together to end this practice. So in 2017, we started our programs in Myanmar, which were roundtables, building 5 justice centers where they had, rule of law and lawyers. And today, when this whole thing happened with a state of emergency, our lawyers, they were ready. They said, we need some additional training, we're organizing, but they have done phenomenally courageous work. I think part of it is that, we've got to be ready. We've got to be responsive. We've got to be ready, but we also have to build this in the long term. They right now, as far as I can see, are really the hope and the protection for the country as they are courageously risking their lives themselves. Some of them, are in hiding. They're absolutely amazing. We need to support defenders because defenders are absolutely critical for democracy. We need to prioritize them. And I think, I take such inspiration all the time from the defenders, because as I see the defenders, they are always saying very much like, not, what is democracy going to do for me? They're like, what can I do for democracy? And I think that's what each of us needs to do. We need to stand up and say, what can I do for democracy in whatever corner I'm in, and move that forward. And also, I think one of the things that's great about being here today is that we're coming from all different places, and yet we see that democracy is a dream for all of us, but we haven't reached it. Nobody has reached this dream of rule of law in any of the countries that we're talking about. So we all have to work on it together and support each other as we, move towards common ground.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I know that there are questions in the margin in the notes, and Deepa, maybe you can pull out some of the ones that you found in there.
I'm going to be cheeky and go with dealer's choice and ask a question first, if I can, if that's all right.
Yes, of course.
With, privilege of the job. But I was quite interested because it's actually a question for you, Glenn, but drawing on what Karen's been saying about rule of law and also stating that democracy, it doesn't exist, and it hasn't existed for so many. So is the pursuit of what we thought democracy was and could be, should be, actually, have we got that wrong? And where do restorative practices, given you've been talking about the punitive nature of the system within the US, actually, where do you see kind of restorative thinking and the move away from punitive to a different form of thinking about justice and social equity? And actually, if we know it's not working, do we need to come up with something a little bit different? So that's my first, as a easy one to start with, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks for that. You're right. As people of color listen to white allies who join us in this effort to push for justice, one of the first things that come up for us is, how are you defining justice? How are you defining the goal? Where are we heading together? And it really resonated when Karen said, wait a minute, most people who are marginalized literally have never participated in any access to anything meaningful in terms of justice. And then if you compound that in the United States with our out of control criminal justice system, which now has permeated our other systems of life, like we're so punitive to each other in the United States. And if you look at our healthcare system, our approach to housing, education, you name it, you'll see elements of our criminal justice system and all of those other systems, whether it's going through a metal detector to get into a school, or having an insurance policy that punishes you if you don't follow the policies and procedures to a T. And so I do think, however, that our criminal justice system has gotten so out of control that it's bled over into impacting particularly poor white Americans. And that's how we have found this sort of common ground in our criminal justice system to be able to have this bipartisan approach to the work. But having said that, I do think that people of color, as we engage and as we ally ourselves with white allies, that we are constantly finding ourselves reminding our allies that our visions for what justice look like may look totally different, and even sometimes finding ourselves experiencing horizontal violence from our allies who themselves wield their own privilege, sometimes extremely unintentionally, but at the same time, that can be as harmful as intentional racism.
Thank you for that. So we've had a question from Gordon. Democracy initiatives are mostly top-down instead of bottom-up. Do you think we need individuals to get to the point where they experience good decision-making almost without biases and influences to become active and meaningful participants and voters in democratic systems? So I'm going to direct that to you, Karen.
I was going to say, I think that's Lenin's question.
Yeah, Lenin?
Yeah. If you look, there is a cognitive factors, there is a contextual factor. Situation is very complex. We have our biases. And you look in my lifetime, I become a degender in 15 years before and decaste 30 years before. So, so a lot of crazy ideas always and biases always influence you. So that is the reality. But the democracy, a process, always like a business, modern business, to share and care. And then you create again share and then care. Then push inch by inch. And then when we are going to win. So whole world one day, like a Tarkovsky, we are going to establish this international socialism for all, and with the participations of everybody with the diversity.
And maybe one last question from Toma. In order to change prisons, we need a demand from society and the electorate. But in order to have this, we first need to change the attitude of ordinary people towards prisoners. How can we do that?
Is that for anyone? Can I just jump in there, start out?
You can start out.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. Earlier I mentioned people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. I really believe that our system of mass incarceration and mass criminalization in the US is an outgrowth of slavery and Jim Crow. And the fact of the matter is that that is undergirded by the dehumanization of the people who actually go through that system and who are harmed by that system. And if we are going to undo that system, we really have to get the majority of people to see people who've been in the system as human beings. We lock up 2.2 million people on any given day in this country, and the majority of Americans can go on with their lives and live decades and never see a person going in and out of a prison. Our prison system lacks light and transparency. And I think the more we can do to open up our prison system to Americans having access and seeing it, is the more people will ultimately say, wait a minute, this doesn't line up with my values. This is not who I am as a person. I don't want to contribute to this. I don't want my tax dollars going to this. And I just believe that if we engage people based on their values and rehumanize people who are involved in the system and create more sunlight, that we'll get better outcomes. And to end on a bright note, we had 2.2 million people in our criminal justice system just 15 years ago, and today we're down to 1.8 million. And here in the US, that's actually progress, some of it based on COVID. But if we can seize on that momentum, I'm hopeful that we can undo mass incarceration eventually.
And if I could just add, Glenn, I was thinking of Brian Stevenson, who said, as you were speaking, who said the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice, which I think is what we're all talking about too. Thank you. Deepa, do we have a moment, or maybe not? I wanted to actually respond to your first question, but maybe.
You've got 30 seconds.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, I just was going to say that I strongly believe that what you're saying about moving forward is really important. And we see this in country after country, that so much of it is based in terms of the justice system in punitive measures. And it doesn't help for people who are being tortured today if we're just doing tribunals looking at the past. So in Cambodia, for instance, it's like tens of millions of dollars to prosecute the Khmer Rouge from so long ago. Meanwhile, it costs $50,000 to build a justice center in one province that saves the lives of every single person being tortured. But can we do it? No, because we're stuck in the past, and we need to be moving forward as we look at, solutions that really bring democracy and freedom and justice.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. We could go on so much longer, but we have another session. And so Deepa and I, and I guess some others who are watching will have to move on. If we could leave the three of you in a room to continue this conversation, that would be amazing, but maybe another day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
huge thanks to Ava, Glenn, Karen, and Lenin for this amazing discussion. Really, really insightful. And yeah, thank you so much for bringing your perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.